Kingscreek is a horror podcast, and thus the content in this episode may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
You are now entering Kingscreek. Episode 11, Corner of Your Eye.
Hi, Damien Bachman here. Sorry for the abrupt ending last time. I got a little distracted. Some pieces fell into place, but that doesn't mean that the puzzle is finished so much as it does mean that I know now that there is a puzzle to finish. I've been looking through these files properly over the last 24 hours, with purpose. When you start looking for it, you really start to notice similarities in these stories. Common threads, ideas, people, entities, I guess. However, despite all of that, I can't seem to find what I'm actually looking for. It's discouraging, but these stories do paint their own strange pictures. This one could be promising. It's a file marked Case D21, Ophthalmic Solution Manifestation, regarding Jacqueline Marina and her strange recurring encounters following a 1989 visit to a pharmacist. Crimson Apothecary seems to be at least pharmacist adjacent, so maybe there's something here. According to the file summary, Miss Marina went in for an eye drops prescription. Interesting. She then went on to have a series of potentially hallucinatory encounters detailed in her doctor's note. Officially, her complaint is alleging that the eye medication caused these hallucinations and requesting an immediate change in prescription. Based on what I skimmed from this story, though, that doesn't seem to actually be the core of her concerns. Also, Miss Marina's doctor was based in the city, apparently. It doesn't seem like an incredibly important detail right now, but it's underlined here. So, I thought I'd mention it. And I guess it does provide some context for these opening few lines. Dr. Novitzin, apologies for any poor spelling, handwriting, or general sloppiness in this letter. I haven't been sleeping well, and constant stress has had a negative effect on my physical and mental faculties. Hopefully, you can not only understand my situation, but also see why it's imperative that you help change it as soon as possible. As we've previously discussed, I have chronic vision problems. Ever since I was younger, my eyes would constantly dry out while reading, watching television, or any other kind of extended usage. It's hurt my ability to see things clearly, and I've been taking eye drops for as long as I can remember to help mitigate the issue. But, as seemed to be the case with many medications, the over-the-counter brand I had been using seemingly wasn't working as well as it used to. What made it problematic was that it was very hard to notice the degradation. Everything at first glance seemed completely visible, but if I tried to focus on details, sometimes there would be this interference, almost. Not quite blurry, but more like a gray fuzz, like you'd see on a television screen with no signal. I also became more clumsy. I don't even know how I managed that either. I was seemingly so unaware that I didn't even feel myself bump into the objects I ran into. I'd just be standing next to a kitchen countertop with a pleasantly boring vase, and a moment later, the vase was on the ground in pieces, as if I didn't even see it happen. It wasn't a debilitating issue. I've met plenty of people who are hopelessly clumsy, yet still manage to make it through the day, but I also know that these things have a tendency to degrade over time. So that was when I spoke with you about this, and you assigned me the new eye drop prescription. Kingscreek is a small town without a traditional pharmacy. Thus, I requested the prescription by mail. In the 2 weeks or so it took to arrive, my vision issues made me so clumsy that it felt like I was knocking something over almost every day without realizing it. I was at my wit's end when it finally arrived in the mail and took the treatment as soon as humanly possible. I normally wouldn't go through the minutia of what it was like to put the eye drops in, but you must understand. I've been taking eye drops my entire life, and it's almost always the same. There's sometimes a slight burning sensation, usually it feels like it's running down the back of my throat, and sometimes it's even cold. I've run into the same feelings again and again and again. I know them as well as I know the back of my hand. But this time, there was a difference. A sharp, acrid smell like concentrated petrichor. A slight tingling, one that made my eyes for a moment feel like they were vibrating. I don't know if that's a common side effect, but it does fall in line with what happened in the days after. I don't know when exactly it started. You have to understand, I don't know if I even would have noticed it if it weren't for the falcon. I'm not exactly a bird watcher. Bad vision makes that particular hobby frustrating at best and impossible at worst, but I have dabbled in avian taxonomy. So, a week or two ago, when I saw a peregrine falcon in a nearby tree, I stopped what I was doing to get a better look. If you know anything about peregrine falcons, you know how fast they are, so when this one suddenly took flight and started soaring across the sky, there was a considerable delay between its movement and my turning my head to follow. So, for a moment, I was forced to rely on my peripheral vision. That's when I first saw it. Something in the corner of my eye. It was subtle, not loud or intimidating, but definitely there. I turned my attention towards where I had seen it, but once my eyes focused, it was gone, like it had never been there in the first place. When I think back and try to focus on what I saw, it's hard to remember specific details, largely because, well, it was in my peripheral vision. But for some reason, it was memorable enough to not completely write off as a trick of the light, even though, logically, that's all it could have been. Or so I thought at the time. Whatever the case, I didn't exactly have a lot to go off of. Even if I didn't think it was a visual trick of some sort, I didn't even really see what it was. So, all I was left with was the nagging feeling of something ominous. Time passed. I forgot about the strange sighting within a few hours, and a day or two later I was at work. I have a fairly by-the-book supervising position at the local grocery store, and one of my duties is inspecting the products on the shelves, making sure everything is in date and undamaged and whatever else. Unfortunately, the eye drops hadn't really improved my clumsiness, so I was still knocking things over. It was almost comedic. Sometimes I didn't even think I had come close to touching it. Whatever the case, I was extra careful at work, lest I knock over any fragile merchandise or perishable food items. On this particular day, I was inspecting the produce section, making sure we didn't have any mold or stray insects. It was quiet, peaceful. I was surrounded by the sterile yet earthy aroma of fresh vegetables. But then, another scent slowly began to drift in. It was that same acrid petrichor I had smelled when I first took my eye drops. I paused what I was doing. What was going on? I tasted iron. I put my hand to my face and it came away red. A nosebleed, that's what it was. Maybe the air pressure changed and the petrichor smell was a side effect of the nosebleed. I quickly turned around, planning to make my way over to the first aid kit, when I froze. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see it again. The same presence. It was still in my peripheral vision, but this time I noticed actual details. It was tall, black, and thin. 2 little red dots glowed from the top of the shape, the scarlet astigmatism dancing across my vision. When it entered my line of sight, I started to hear this rumbling, like the thundering of a rainstorm. All the while, the thing didn't move. That was what I was able to gather in the split second it was in my vision. I, of course, whipped my head around quickly to look in its direction, but the instant I focused on it, it was gone. The thundering stopped, and the petrichor evaporated. I stood there, frozen, unsure what to do, before a drop of blood on my hand reminded me of my nose. I quickly ran to the back office, spent an hour with my face held level, not held back as the common misconception suggests, and spent the next half hour cleaning up bloodstains in the produce aisle. Nothing else of note happened that night, but I was still on edge for hours afterward. It all began to go downhill after that. I became paranoid. I tried to get more rest to combat any potential hallucinations, but my sleep was troubled and inconsistent. I started looking behind me, kept checking my nose, and searched for the faintest whiff of petrichor with every breath. I felt I was being a little irrational in reaction to what had obviously been some kind of trick, but it didn't help the anxiety I felt. My work began to suffer. I would show up late, exhausted, and while the metric gallons of coffee I took alleviated the fatigue, they exacerbated the paranoia. My clumsiness got worse. It felt like I was constantly knocking something over. I was a real mess. The worst part is that it wasn't just the grocery store encounter that set me down this path. It was the big, obvious incident, but it wasn't enough to fuel my paranoia for that long. I kept seeing little glimpses, little sightings of the tall, dark shape, little snippets of glowing red eyes, small whiffs of petrichor. I wasn't sure if it was real or not. Frankly, I'm still not sure. But it kept showing up. The doubt of it all was enough to drive me mad. Was I losing my mind? Would it be better or worse if I wasn't? During the last day or two, I stopped leaving my house. I didn't know what else I could have done, but I knew that, at least, if it was real, it would be harder for me to be found here. And if I was breaking down, I could at least minimize the damage. Last night was another exhausted, half-dreaming, half-waking nightmare haze. Paranoia enveloped me. I jumped at every shadow and squealed at every noise. I was still taking my eye drops, though I had gotten a lot less precise. I managed to somehow fill up the dropper way more than needed, and so before I knew it, I had squeezed what felt like a gallon of drop fluid onto my right eye. It hurt like hell. My entire eye felt like it was on fire. I tried to blink, but that just rubbed the fluid in even more. Fiery tears streamed down my face as I fell to my hands and knees, knocked back by the pain. Then, I smelled petrichor. I looked up, and there it was, the shape, standing in my doorframe. Though I couldn't properly focus on it. I could only actually see it in my right eye, the still stinging eye, and the attempt to focus both eyes in its direction just made my head hurt. It seemed blurry, too. The whole shape out of focus, like static, or TV snow, almost. Some kind of fuzz. The sound of thunder was deafening, pounding against the side of my head. The petrichor was overpowering, and through it all, the two bright red dots stared down, towering over me. I was still reeling from the pain, my heart pounding in my chest, and I could barely focus while it stood stock still, never able to get a good look at it. Then, it moved. In one jerky motion, it bent over sideways, practically directly in half, so that its head was level with mine, upside down. While the rest of the creature's body was fuzzy, its eyes were as clear as day, wide, red, glowing. My heart pounded faster and faster, and then stopped. Because I realized at that moment that when it moved, it had knocked over a vase, just in the same way I would. Or at least, I thought I was the one doing it all this time. This was all too much, so I did the only thing I could. I squeezed my eyes shut. The second I did, it all stopped. The thundering quieted in an instant, and the petrichor dissipated. The throbbing in my eye was still there, but it had calmed to a normal, soft burn. I opened my good eye and saw nothing. The room was empty, besides the sound of my heavy breathing. I got to my feet and put my hand over my eye. I was alone, it seemed. Everything was silent, still. I felt a wave of relief rush over me like warm water, almost laughing. It hadn't been real. It couldn't have been. I thought this even as I looked down and saw the pieces of the vase on the floor. But that was no issue, because I had been hallucinating. I must have just knocked it over, like usual. I was just clumsy, after all, even able to knock over vases on the other side of the room. The eye drops must have caused this, I thought to myself. Some kind of psychoactive substance that made me see things that weren't there. I kept the eye I had doused in the drops shut tight as I walked through the doorframe, ignoring the cold shiver. I spent an hour washing out my eye until it was red and sore, but mixture-free. Then, I threw away the bottle and sat down to write this account. As you can see, this prescription has caused me immense distress, and I quite frankly probably have enough material here to sue you and the manufacturer for emotional damages. But I, more than anything, just wish to be done with this whole business. So, I hope you can recommend some new eye drop medication, preferably a brand that won't produce any side effects like this. In the meantime, I'll accept knocking over a few things while I wait. Sincerely, Jacqueline Marina. Man, people really like suing for improper medical care in this town, eh? Maybe the real mystery is something in the water making everyone super litigious. There are a couple things of note here. For one, the brand of eyedropper medication Miss Marina was using has a bit of a reputation, apparently. Clean-O-Vision, as it's called, is a drug produced in Wisconsin that, in the 80s and 90s, while it was a very effective eye drop solution, became infamous for sometimes producing strange side effects, most chiefly hallucinations. People kept seeing things that weren't there, so, despite its efficacy, it was discontinued in the mid-90s. That part seems to support Miss Marina's claim. But, it's also worth noting that she vanished just a week after this medical complaint was filed. She was never found, either. And more to the point, there wasn't an investigation filed until well after her last known sighting, because she seemingly vanished just as she was about to take a trip out of town, via bus. She never arrived at her destination. In any case, this isn't super helpful for me. The idea of a weird hallucinatory eyedropper drug is interesting, I guess, but it doesn't actually connect with anything related to Crimson Apothecaries outside of just being vaguely medicinal. Well, I'll just keep digging. There's gotta be something more in here. After all, if they did something to Uncle Mark, he must have found something really big about them. And if they're still around, I'm going to have to be as prepared as I can. This is Damien Bachman, signing off.
Today's episode of Kingscreek was written and performed by Thomas S. Dennis. It was produced by James Makepeace, and the score was composed by Kai After Kai. Script supervision is provided by James Makepeace and Ryan Kennedy. Our cover art is by CyberGrapeUK, and our social media manager is Ryan Kennedy. All episodes are a production of Tracer Magnum Entertainment. If you'd like to support the show, rate and review us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Castbox, or whatever service you use to listen to our show. It helps tremendously and ensures we're seen by more and more of the unsuspecting public. If you'd like to get in touch with us or become involved with the community, join our Discord server, post on the r/Kingscreek subreddit, or follow us on Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok, and Tumblr, all under the handle @KingscreekOfficial. Share with your friends, family, or anyone else you want to ensnare in our web. And above all else, thank you for listening.